3 facts about texture. Fact number 1. What texture is? Texture is the way objects or surfaces feel or look like they feel. Everything in the world that you can touch has texture. When you touch something and feel it, you're dealing with that object's actual texture. There are many objects in the world that we cannot touch, but they still have texture. Although we cannot touch these things, we imagine what they feel like by the way that their surface looks. The texture is implied or suggested by the way we see the surface and imagine what that surface would feel like if we could touch it. An example of this would be big, white, puffy clouds. We can't touch the clouds, but we imagine that they would be soft and fluffy, just like cotton balls, which look very similar. Another example of this would be a rabbit's fur in a drawing. We can't really feel the furriness of the rabbit with our hands, but we know that the rabbit has a furry texture by the way that the artist has represented it in the drawing. Fact number 2. Texture's purpose in art. There are 2 main reasons that artists use texture in their artwork. The first one is to make the art look more realistic, more like our real world. Take a look at the example of this bird. We know it's a bird in the first drawing, but the second drawing, which shows the bird with texture, represents a more realistic looking bird than the one in the first drawing. The second reason that artists use texture in their artwork is to add visual interest. The oval on the left side is less visually interesting than the oval on the right. The only difference between the two is that the artist has added texture to the one on the right, which has made it more interesting to look at. And fact number 3. The 3 different types of texture found in art. Number 1. Real or actual texture. In any artwork, the textures that we can actually feel with our hands are called actual or real texture. For example, if I run my hand over a painting, the real or actual texture would be smooth or bumpy, depending on how the paint was applied. If the paint was painted on in a very flat manner, the real or actual texture of the artwork would be smooth. If the paint was globbed onto the canvas, then the real or actual texture of the artwork would be bumpy. Here are some examples of real or actual texture in artwork. Believe it or not, this hairy cup and saucer are displayed in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, a very famous and important art museum. The actual texture of this artwork, created by the artist Merritt Oppenheim, is furry or hairy. The real or actual texture in this marble Roman sculpture would be mostly smooth around the face and neck and bumpy on the hair. The actual texture on the tip of the nose would be rough because the marble has broken off in that spot. The second kind of texture in art is called simulated texture. In any artwork, the texture that we can see in the artwork but cannot feel with our hands is called simulated texture. Simulated refers to something that is a copy of the original or the real thing. Here are examples of the simulated textures of several objects. These are considered simulated textures because you can't actually feel the texture, but you know how it would feel because of how the artist drew them. In this artwork, we can see how the artist created the simulated texture of an eye with a tear in it. And the third kind of texture in art is called invented texture. This is when the artist makes up their own texture, drawing lines and shapes without worrying about how it looks like it feels. The main purpose behind invented texture is to add visual interest to an artwork and does not attempt to represent the world in a realistic way by showing accurate texture.